The ballroom of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library was unlike anything it had seen in years. 1,000 political elites, media personalities, and curious citizens filled the grand chamber, buzzing with anticipation. They weren't there for a former president or seasoned senator. They were there for Barron William Trump, the youngest son of the current sitting U.S. President Donald J. Trump. And nobody had a clue what to expect. For years, Barron had been the quiet Trump, a silhouette in the background of press photos, a tall and striking teenager who had famously avoided public speaking, rarely posted on social media, and kept to himself during the chaos of the Trump family's political dynasty. Many dismissed him as simply the quiet son. Others whispered that he was being groomed behind closed doors, not for business but for politics. But today was different. The official invite had been vague. It simply read, "The future begins, a message from Barron Trump." Location, Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, Simi Valley, California. Time, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Speculation ran wild. Was this a PR stunt? A college announcement? A speech crafted by his father's advisors? Would Barron say a few polite words and disappear again into the shadows? What happened instead, no one, not the press, not the people, not even his own family, could have predicted. As the clock ticked past 7, the stage lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room. A single spotlight lit the podium at the center of the stage. Then, from the side curtain, a figure emerged. He was towering, nearly 6 feet 8 inches in height, dressed in a dark navy suit tailored to perfection. His expression was calm, almost steely, like someone who had waited for this moment all his life. The crowd sat frozen as he approached the microphone. Barron paused, looked out into the sea of faces. And then he spoke. "Good evening, America." A simple phrase. But the tone, the command, the presence immediately shifted the atmosphere. This wasn't a boy stepping up to speak. This was a man armed with a message. "Tonight, I speak not as the son of a president, not as a figure in the background of headlines, but as an American. A concerned citizen. A young man who's watched, listened, and waited." You could hear a pin drop. Even seasoned journalists, known for typing mid-speech, had set their laptops aside. I've seen my family ridiculed and praised. I've seen the media build and destroy legacies. But through it all, I kept wondering who's really listening to the young people. Who speaks for us? Where's our voice in this America? The crowd was still. The sincerity in his voice wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't a script. It was real. My generation is not apathetic. We are not entitled. We are not weak. We are searching for meaning, for leadership, and for truth. The crowd began to murmur, then nod. Some were visibly shocked. Even former critics were glued to every word. I have watched my father take on impossible odds. I've seen his flaws and I've seen his courage. But this isn't about him. It's about you. It's about us. He stepped away from the podium for a moment, looked across the room. For too long, the youth of this nation has been handed down opinions instead of encouraged to think. We've been taught what to believe instead of how to question. I want to change that. I want to be part of the generation that thinks for itself. Now murmurs were turning into soft claps. I stand here not to ask for approval, but to ignite a conversation. About education. About technology. About the mental health crisis no one wants to talk about. About the truth behind the headlines. He raised his voice slightly now, emotion starting to crack through. We have to stop yelling and start listening. We have to stop canceling and start understanding. And above all, we need to remember that we are Americans before we are partisans. A thunderous applause broke out. Slowly, people began to rise from their chairs one by one. Then rose at a time. I'm Barron Trump. I'm 19 years old. And I love this country. I don't have all the answers. But I promise I will never be silent again. The room erupted. Phones went up. Hashtags started trending before the lights even came back on. Hashtag Barron speaks. Hashtag NextGen leader. Hashtag Trump legacy reborn. The ovation went on for nearly 5 minutes straight. And as Barron Trump stood at the center of it all, smiling humbly but firmly, America knew. Something had just shifted. The morning after Barron Trump's speech, America woke up to a different political climate. News outlets scrambled to pivot their narratives. The ones that had for years labeled him as a quiet mystery were now forced to reevaluate. From CNN to Fox News, the New York Times to the Daily Wire, headlines read, Barron Trump stuns America. A new voice rises in the Trump legacy. Barron speaks and the nation listens. Even typically critical commentators couldn't ignore what had happened. CNN's Jake Tapper admitted on air, I came expecting platitudes and maybe a politically polished performance. What I saw was a young man speak with conviction, clarity, and above all, authenticity. That kind of moment is rare. Clips of the speech went viral. In under 24 hours, it had over 50 million views on X, formerly Twitter, and TikTok was flooded with videos from teens and young adults reacting, lip-syncing to key phrases, stitching responses with teary eyes and goosebumps. "This is the first political speech I've ever watched in full," said one Gen Z creator. "He actually spoke to us, not down to us," said another. Suddenly, Barron Trump wasn't just a trending name, he was a movement. At Mar-a-Lago, President Donald Trump sat watching the clips roll in on multiple screens. For once, he wasn't the headline. And he loved it. "That's my boy," he said, pointing at the screen. "I always told people he was special, smart, reserved, but strong. They didn't believe me. Now they're seeing it for themselves." Melania Trump, ever the protective mother, had watched the event from a quiet room backstage. Her eyes had welled up the moment Barron said, "I want to change that." She knew how hard he had worked to craft his own voice, separate from the gravity of his father's name. Back in Washington, D.C., the speech sent ripples through the political establishment. Congressional aides whispered about polling shifts. Emails with the subject line "Barron Trump" flooded inboxes. Across Ivy League campuses, political science professors reassigned lectures. The Barron effect was now a discussion topic in real time. Could a new wave of politically engaged youth be catalyzed by a single moment? Meanwhile, Barron himself retreated quietly to his hotel suite in Simi Valley after the speech. He wasn't expecting this level of reaction. Not this fast. His phone was flooded. Messages from celebrities, politicians, student leaders, and even foreign dignitaries poured in. One message stood out. It was from Michelle Obama. "Barron, you spoke from the heart. And that's what great leaders do. Whatever path you choose next, stay grounded. The world needs voices like yours." He read the message 3 times. It was surreal. But Barron wasn't chasing the spotlight. He wasn't launching a campaign. Not yet. He was starting a conversation. The next day, a surprise happened. The White House press secretary, under direction from President Trump, announced that the president would not be making a statement about Barron's speech. "The president believes this is Barron's moment," she said. "He supports his son fully and is immensely proud, but he wants Barron's words to speak for themselves." And speak they did. Students across the country began forming groups called "Think for Us," a phrase Barron had dropped in his speech. The idea? Create community discussions without party labels, where young Americans could debate, dream, and challenge the status quo. Even more surprising, several liberal groups extended invitations for Barron to speak, not as a Republican, but as a representative of a generation tired of being ignored. Saturday Night Live even had to rewrite their cold open. Instead of mocking a Trump, they portrayed Barron as a rising political prodigy, with a young actor playing him confidently delivering lines that echoed the speech, while politicians fainted in awe. The internet exploded with memes. When you go from background character to main event. The Lion Awakens. Barron 2040? Backstage at his hotel, Barron looked at his reflection in the mirror. He hadn't expected to feel so clear, like a fog had lifted. He whispered to himself. They listened. 3 days after Barron Trump's speech, Washington, D.C. felt a tremor. Not physical, but political. It wasn't just the speech anymore. It was what the speech had started. Young people across the nation began organizing spontaneous meetups, parks, college quads, community centers. They called them Barron Circles. No flyers, no ads, no party branding. Just conversations. Some read aloud transcripts of his speech. Others brought guitars, poetry, laptops. It was part town hall, part open mic. And it was growing. Fast. At UCLA, over 700 students showed up on the lawn, sitting in a massive circle under string lights and quoting lines from Barron's address like scripture. Across the country in Miami, high schoolers marched from their school to the courthouse, holding signs that read, "We think for us." Not red, not blue, just truth. Political analysts were stunned. They hadn't seen this kind of organic political awakening among youth since the Obama campaign of 2008, And this wasn't even tied to an election. It was tied to a person. More than that, it was tied to an idea. Barron had tapped into a truth. That millions of young Americans were exhausted. Not from politics, but from the performance of politics. The constant finger-pointing. The media circus. The disconnection between real life and the headlines. For many, his speech had been like a match to dry kindling. Meanwhile, inside the halls of power, both parties took notice. The GOP saw a golden opportunity. Conservative strategists began floating the idea of Barron joining the 2026 midterm campaign trail, not as a candidate but as a symbol, a unifier, someone who could bring the youth vote back to the right. Democrats, to their own surprise, weren't hostile. Some even expressed admiration. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "We need more young voices in politics." I may not agree with his father, but Barron Trump showed something rare. Humanity. That's a good thing for democracy. The comment shocked her base but also earned her respect. Back at Mar-a-Lago, Barron tried to stay grounded. Despite the fanfare, he still played chess with the kitchen staff, read political theory, and kept a strict digital detox schedule, only checking his phone twice a day. One afternoon, Melania approached him on the garden terrace. "You started something," she said softly. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Barron didn't answer right away. He looked out at the Atlantic, thoughtful. "I didn't plan for this, Mom, but I'm not afraid of it either." She nodded, a rare smile playing at her lips. "Good, because once people believe in you, you can't disappear again." That night, Barron made his first public post since the speech. He uploaded a short video on Instagram. No background music, no editing. Just him in a simple t-shirt speaking straight to camera. "Hey everyone. I just wanted to say thank you, not for the support, but for the conversations that are happening across the country. It's not about me. It's about us waking up together. Stay curious. Stay kind. And keep questioning everything." The video had 10 million views in an hour. It became clear this wasn't a one-time moment. This was a movement in motion. At Georgetown University, a freshman named Nadia started a podcast called The Barron Effect, interviewing young Americans on how the speech inspired them to engage. In Chicago, a group of teenage coders launched an app called Civic, a platform for organizing community town halls with a tagline inspired by Barron's words, "We listen before we speak." In rural Kentucky, a 17-year-old farm kid named Tyler stood up during a school board meeting and quoted Barron directly. "I'm not here for approval. I'm here for truth." The room went silent. Then someone clapped. Soon, teachers were playing clips of the speech in civics classes. Not as propaganda, but as a case study in modern rhetoric and youth leadership. The ripple effect was real. And inside the Oval Office, Donald Trump watched all this unfold. For once, he didn't interrupt the moment. He didn't try to grab the mic. He simply told his advisors, "This one's his." By the end of the week, Barron Trump had become more than a trending name. He was an open question to America. Political talk shows no longer debated policy. They debated him. Is Barron Trump the beginning of a new political dynasty or the end of one? Is he a unifier or just another brand of populism with a Gen Z twist? Can someone so young really challenge the system without being consumed by it? But while cable news spun theories and narratives, Barron stayed out of the spotlight. He wasn't playing the usual game. He refused invitations from every major news outlet, even 60 Minutes. When asked for interviews, his team issued a consistent, simple reply. Barron believes this movement isn't about one person's story. It's about the country's next chapter. Still, the momentum didn't stop. In Atlanta, a group of students created a pop-up event titled Voices Unfiltered, where people from all walks of life were invited to share 2-minute speeches on anything. No judging. No cameras. Just raw thought. The format went viral. Within 2 weeks, there were 118 Voices Unfiltered gatherings across 36 states. In Iowa, a small-town principal received a request from his senior class to dedicate their graduation ceremony to the power of free thought, using Barron's speech as the thematic anchor. And something else began to change. Parents started listening to their kids more. It was subtle at first. Dinner table debates grew deeper. Family group chats took a new tone. Teens began sending their parents the video of Barron's speech, not to convince them of anything political, but to say, "This is how I feel too." It was a generational bridge, unexpected and unplanned. Behind the scenes, the Republican National Committee tried, quietly, to bring Barron into the fold. He refused. He didn't want to be co-opted. "I don't want to be a pawn in anyone's game," he told a close friend during a phone call. "If I'm going to speak again, it'll be on my terms." But others didn't need his permission to be inspired. In a rare moment of bipartisan agreement, the House of Representatives passed a symbolic resolution titled Resolution 217, honoring emerging youth voices, citing Barron Trump's speech as a catalyst. In classrooms across America, English teachers gave a new assignment: write your own version of Barron's speech as if you were speaking to the nation. An 8th grader in Detroit wrote, "I'm tired of being told I'm too young to care. Maybe the world needs a few more people who still believe we can fix things." And a junior in Oregon delivered her version over the school intercom, ending with, "We are not the future. We are the present, trying to be heard." The echoes of that original moment continued to build. The standing ovation hadn't ended, it had expanded far beyond the room Barron had stood in. And still, he stayed quiet. Until a week after the speech, when a small, unpublicized event appeared on a live stream hosted by a nonprofit called Future Foundation. Barron appeared again. No stage this time. Just a roundtable of 12 students, ages 16 to 22, from every background imaginable. No labels. No advisors. No teleprompter. "This is what I wanted to do from the beginning," he said, smiling. "Not just talk, listen." He wasn't giving another speech. He was having a dialogue. For 2 hours, the group discussed AI and education, the loneliness epidemic, digital addiction, gun policy, and media trust. No shouting. No grandstanding. Just thought. At one point, a young man from Queens asked, "Do you think you're going to run for office?" Barron smiled and replied, "That's the question everyone wants answered. But maybe we should ask a different one first." He leaned forward. "What kind of country do we want to become, and who are we willing to become to make it real?" Silence. Goosebumps. He didn't need a podium. He didn't need a title. He had already become something more powerful. A mirror for a generation trying to define itself. It had been 1 month since Barron Trump delivered the speech that rippled across the country. 1 month since a quiet teenager became the voice of a generation. And America hadn't moved on. For once, the news cycle hadn't devoured and discarded a moment, it had evolved with it. Late-night shows still joked about him, but even the jokes were respectful. The memes remained, but many had shifted from sarcasm to admiration. Editorials across the political spectrum, from The Atlantic to National Review, asked the same question in different ways. Is Barron Trump the future of American leadership? Meanwhile, Barron stayed off-camera, refusing to let the spotlight dictate his pace. Instead, he worked behind the scenes, connecting with student organizers, educators, community leaders. Quietly, he began helping fund local town hall-style forums under the banner of Think for Us, all without fanfare. The goal wasn't political control. It was political curiosity. One of the first major events took place in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Over 1,500 young adults showed up in the middle of a snowstorm for a chance to speak and be heard, not by politicians, but by each other. An 18-year-old girl stood on stage, holding the microphone with shaking hands. "I was planning to take my life 3 months ago," she said. "I felt like nobody cared what someone like me had to say. Then I saw a clip of Barron Trump's speech, and it was the first time I heard someone in power say, 'We need to listen.' I'm still here because of that moment." The crowd stood and applauded. Barron, watching from the wings in an unmarked hoodie and jeans, wiped a tear from his cheek. He didn't want the story to be about him. But it kept happening. At Harvard, the Kennedy School hosted a panel called Youth, Leadership, and the Barron Paradigm. Professors dissected his rhetoric not as propaganda, but as an authentic case study of how message can transcend legacy. In a letter to alumni, the president of Princeton wrote, "What we witnessed in Barron Trump was the power of stillness before speech. A reminder that the most revolutionary leaders are often the most unexpected." Even former presidents began to comment. George W. Bush called the moment hopeful. Barack Obama, during a commencement speech at Stanford, said, "You never know where the next voice of change is going to come from. Sometimes it's a young man who's been quiet too long and finally decides to speak." And Donald Trump? He did what no one expected. He stepped back. At a rally in Ohio, when asked by a supporter if Barron would join the campaign trail, he chuckled. "He's got his own trail now. Maybe I'll ask him for an endorsement someday." The audience laughed, but they all understood Barron had become his own man. Back in Palm Beach, Barron walked along the shoreline, barefoot, away from cameras and advisors. Just him, the ocean, and the future. His phone buzzed an email. Subject, TED Talks invitation, headline speaker, Geneva 2025. He smiled, then turned the screen off. Not yet. He wasn't in a rush. What he had discovered, what had stunned the country, wasn't power. It was purpose. And that's what stayed with America. It wasn't the fact that he was a Trump. It wasn't the polished suit or the standing ovation. It was that, for the first time in a long time, someone had stood at a podium and refused to speak for a party, choosing instead to speak for a generation. He had spoken softly, but the nation heard him like a thunderclap. A new kind of legacy had begun. And Barron Trump? He had only just started writing it. 6 months had passed since that night in Simi Valley. Seasons had changed. News cycles had churned through scandal, policy, war, and celebrity gossip. Yet Barron Trump's name remained. But not as a punchline, not as a pawn, as a symbol. Barron had become a lodestar for young Americans, those who never saw themselves reflected in the shouting matches of mainstream politics. He didn't tell them what to think. He didn't ask them to choose sides. He asked them to show up. And now, across the country, they were. In Tulsa, a Native American Youth Council organized a statewide Think for Us gathering centered around tribal sovereignty and youth mental health. In Baltimore, a group of teenagers turned a burned-out library into a civic cafe, using repurposed furniture, art, and donations to create a space for open discussion. On the wall, a quote from Barron's speech was painted in bold black lettering. "We're not the generation that gave up. We're the one that got back up." Colleges began offering a new elective, Youth and the Future of Political Engagement. Course materials included transcripts from the speech, audio from the student-led town halls, and essays from first-time voters. One essay from a sophomore at Tulane read, "Barron Trump gave us permission to imagine a political identity that wasn't inherited. That's something no one else had done before him." Meanwhile, a quiet revolution was underway in high schools. Teachers, long disillusioned with apathy in civics education, found new energy. Students were asking questions, challenging narratives, demanding relevance. In New York City, a group of ninth graders created a simulation of Congress, not divided by Republican and Democrat, but by values like innovation, equality, accountability, and trust. Their teacher called it the most productive and civil debate he'd seen in 20 years. And still, Barron hadn't announced a campaign. He hadn't taken a job at a think tank. He wasn't hosting a podcast. He wasn't monetizing a movement. He was simply present. He responded to emails from students. He visited local events unannounced. He sat in on community forums like any other participant. In one particularly moving moment, Barron quietly attended a community healing circle in Jackson, Mississippi, where survivors of gang violence gathered. He sat in silence, listened, then spoke for just 60 seconds. "I'm not here to speak for you. I'm here to stand with you. That's all. That's enough." The room fell silent. Then came applause, not for a Trump, but for a human being who cared enough to sit in their pain. And slowly, his presence reshaped the narrative of American politics. Not from the top down, but from the ground up. News anchors now spoke of the Barron generation as a demographic shift. Pollsters saw dramatic changes in youth engagement, especially among 18 to 25-year-olds. Voter registration campaigns surged, many bearing his words as unofficial slogans. "We're not tired. We're just warming up. We don't vote for parties. We vote for futures. Think for us, not over us." Meanwhile, the political elite began to adapt, or risk becoming irrelevant. Candidates on both sides of the aisle were being held accountable by youth forums, many of which streamed live with tens of thousands of engaged viewers asking real, nuanced questions. The political machine had been disrupted, not by a protest, not by violence, but by an idea that took root in a single 19-year-old's voice. And one day, late in the spring, a letter arrived at the office of the Secretary of Education. It came from a coalition of 450 school principals. They requested a national day of youth dialogue to be implemented in the next school year. A day for students to be heard. The letter was signed, "On behalf of the future," inspired by the voice that reminded us to listen. Barron didn't seek credit. He never tweeted about it. But he read the letter in silence, sitting in a quiet corner of a public library in Nashville. He folded it carefully, tucked it in his notebook, and whispered to himself, "This is what a standing ovation really sounds like."